At my sister's wedding reception, she smirked at me across the room and said, "At least I found someone who wants me." The room laughed. But then my 7-year-old son stood up and asked, "Auntie, should I tell everyone why the groom visits mom when you're at work?" And the entire room went dead silent. Before we get to that fateful moment, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's head to that wedding. My little sister's wedding was a fairy tale. A grand, obscenely expensive, and perfectly curated fairy tale. My sister, Morgan, was the princess, radiant in a dress that cost more than my car. And her new husband, Evan, was the handsome, successful prince. I, of course, was the evil, unmarried stepsister, a role my family had so lovingly cast me in for my entire adult life. As a single mother to my 7-year-old son, Cody, I had always been the less fortunate one, the cautionary tale, the one they would look at with a mixture of pity and a quiet, smug satisfaction. The wedding reception, held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, was the pinnacle of this dynamic. I was seated at a table in the back, a distant satellite orbiting the bright, burning sun of my sister's perfect day. The speeches were the worst part. It was a parade of passive aggression, a series of toasts that were less about celebrating my sister's marriage and more about highlighting my own single status. My uncle, Franklin, was the one who began the assault. He stood, raised his glass, and after a few generic words about the happy couple, he turned his gaze to me. "It is so wonderful," he said, his voice a little too loud, "to see my niece, Morgan, find such happiness. It just proves that there really is a lid for every pot. Though some of us," he chuckled, and a few of our relatives tittered along with him, "seem to have misplaced our lid." I just smiled, a tight, practiced, and utterly false smile, and took a sip of my water. But the main event, as always, was my sister. When it was her turn to speak, she stood beside her handsome new husband, a vision of bridal perfection. She thanked her friends, her parents, and then she looked directly at me, across the vast, glittering ballroom, and she delivered the killing blow, her voice full of a sweet, poisonous sympathy. "I just feel so lucky," she said, her eyes shining. "At least I found someone who wants me." The laughter that followed was a quiet, cruel ripple through the room. It was not a joke. It was a public declaration of my worthlessness. I could feel the hot, humiliating tears welling up in my eyes, and I stared down at my plate, praying for the floor to swallow me whole. My son, Cody, who was sitting beside me, saw it all. He saw the cruel smiles. He saw the tears in my eyes. He was too young to understand the complex adult cruelty of what had just happened, but he understood the simple, powerful truth of it. They have made his mother cry. He tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy," he whispered, his own small face a mask of worried confusion, "is Auntie Morgan being so mean to you?" And he looked over at the head table, at his handsome new Uncle Evan. "Is she mad that Uncle Evan comes to our house to talk to you when she's not there?" My blood ran cold. "Shh, sweetie," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We don't talk about that here. It's a grown-up secret." He looked at me, his brow furrowed in the way that children do when they are trying to understand the bizarre, nonsensical rules of the adult world. He was a good boy. He was a quiet boy. And I thought he was about to let it go. I had no idea that the small, innocent seed of a question I had just tried to bury was about to blossom in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. I had no idea that my sweet, quiet, and fiercely loyal son had just decided to defend his mother's honor, and in doing so, was about to detonate a bomb that would destroy my sister's perfect fairy tale forever. I sat there at that back table, a ghost at my own sister's wedding feast, the echoes of their cruel laughter of physical ringing pain in my ears. I was trying so desperately not to cry, to hold on to the last tattered shreds of my dignity. My son, Cody, My sweet 7-year-old boy looked up at me, his own face a small, perfect mirror of my own heartbreak. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. He understood the cruelty. He tugged on my sleeve, his small voice a worried whisper. "Mommy, why is Auntie Morgan being so mean?" he asked. And then he added the words that made my own blood run cold. "Is she mad that Uncle Evan comes to our house to talk to you when she's not there?" "Shh, sweetie," I had whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "That's a grown-up secret. We don't talk about that here." But I had underestimated the fierce, unwavering, and beautifully simple sense of justice that lives in the heart of a 7-year-old boy who has just seen his mother be hurt. The memory of the past few weeks flooded back to me. The secret, the terrible, impossible secret I had been carrying for my sister's sake. It had started with a knock on my door 3 weeks ago. It was Evan, my sister's fiancé, my future brother-in-law. His face had been pale, his eyes full of a tormented, desperate misery. He had confessed everything. He told me he was making a terrible mistake, that he was in love with me, not my sister. He said that he had always been in love with me from the moment we had first met, but that I had been with someone else at the time, and he had settled for the next best thing, the sister who looked so much like me. He was a coward, he admitted, trapped in a life he had built out of a fear of being alone. I had been horrified. I had told him in no uncertain terms that he was to leave my house, that he had to tell my sister the truth, that I would never, ever betray her. He had come back twice since then, begging, pleading, a broken man making a mess of all of our lives. And I had kept his terrible, pathetic secret, believing I was protecting my sister from a heartbreak she didn't deserve. Back at the wedding reception, the speeches had continued. My uncle, Franklin, was now telling a long, boring story about a childhood fishing trip. But I wasn't listening. I was just trying to breathe. And then it happened. My son, Cody, who had been sitting in a quiet, simmering rage of his own, suddenly slipped off his chair. Before I could stop him, he began to walk with a small, determined purpose towards the head table. "Cody, honey, come back here," I whispered frantically, but he didn't listen. He walked right up to the head table, a tiny, determined figure in a little suit, and he stood directly in front of his aunt, the beautiful, radiant bride. The room, noticing this small, unexpected drama, began to fall silent. My sister, Morgan, looked down at him, a look of amused, condescending affection on her face. "Well, hello there, little man," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Have you come to give your own toast? Do you have something you want to say?" "Yes," Cody said, his own voice a clear, high bell in the now silent ballroom. He looked directly at his beautiful, smiling aunt. He took a deep breath. "Auntie Morgan," he began, his voice full of a genuine, innocent, and utterly devastating curiosity, "should I tell everyone why the groom, my new Uncle Evan, comes to our house to visit my mommy all the time when you're at work?" The silence that followed was a profound and terrible thing. It was a silence so complete, so absolute, that I could hear the faint, high-pitched ringing of a wine glass from a nearby table. The air, which had been so full of laughter and celebration just moments before, was now a cold, dead vacuum. I watched, as if in slow motion, as my sister's beautiful, radiant bridal smile did not just fade, but seemed to shatter, as if it were made of glass. I watched as her eyes, full of a smug, triumphant light, were suddenly filled with a new, dawning, and horrifying suspicion. She looked from the innocent, questioning face of my son to my own pale, horrified face, and then finally to the face of the man sitting beside her, her new husband. Evan was a statue. He was frozen in his chair, his face the color of ash, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He had been caught. He had been exposed. Not by me, not by his own conscience, but by the simple, brutal, and uncomplicated truth of a 7-year-old boy. My my parents, the entire room of guests just stared, their mouths agape, as the beautiful, perfect fairy tale wedding of my golden child sister imploded in on itself in a moment of pure, exquisite, and unintended karmic justice. Cody, my sweet, brave, and utterly clueless little hero, just looked around at the silent, horrified faces and then back at me, his own face a picture of confusion. "Did I say something wrong, Mommy?" he whispered across the room. Before I could answer, I saw my sister Morgan slowly turn her head to look at her new husband, and the look in her eyes was not one of heartbreak. It was a look of pure, unadulterated murder. I stood up. My time as a silent, suffering spectator was over. My son had just, in his own beautiful and innocent way, set me free. I walked over to him, took his small, warm hand in my own, and I began to walk out of that silent, frozen ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my sister's perfect day and my old, broken life behind me for good. I walked out of that grand, suffocating ballroom, my son Cody's small, warm hand held tightly in my own. The sound of the heavy, ornate doors closing behind us was a soft, final thud, a punctuation mark on the end of my old life, the one where I had been the silent, accommodating, and perpetually overlooked older sister. The chaos I had left behind, the shouting, the crying, the symphony of a family imploding, was not my concern anymore. My only concern was the small, brave, and utterly bewildered boy walking beside me. The car ride home was a quiet, surreal journey through a city that seemed oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just been torn apart and then strangely pieced back together into a new and unfamiliar shape. "Did I do a bad thing, Mommy?" Cody asked, his voice a small, worried whisper in the DAC car. Auntie Morgan looked really, really mad. I pulled the car over to the side of a quiet, tree-lined street and turned to face him, my heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice soft but with an unshakable certainty. "You did not do a bad thing. You did the bravest and most honest thing in the entire world. You saw that someone was hurting me, and you stood up for me. You told the truth." I reached over and brushed the hair from his forehead. "That doesn't make you bad. That makes you a hero." He seemed to understand. He gave me a small, tired smile, leaned his head against the window, and was asleep before we even got home. I carried him into our small, quiet apartment, a sanctuary of peace and normalcy in a world that had just gone insane. I tucked him into his bed, a silent promise in my heart that I would spend the rest of my life protecting him from the fallout of the truth he had so bravely spoken. I knew they would come. It was only a matter of time. I made a pot of coffee, sat in my favorite armchair, and I waited. The knock on my door came just after midnight. It was not a polite knock. It was a frantic, desperate banging. I opened the door. It was my sister, Morgan, still in her magnificent, ridiculously expensive wedding dress, her face a swollen, tear-streaked ruin of makeup and rage. And standing behind her, looking pale, defeated, and utterly pathetic, was her new husband, Evan. "How could you?" Morgan shrieked, pushing past me into my apartment. Her voice was a raw, ugly thing. "How could you do this to me? On my wedding day? You were always jealous of me, always. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you coached your son. You told him to say those things, to ruin my life." I just looked at her hysterical, self-pitying rage, and I felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy. Just a vast, empty, and profound sense of pity. "I didn't coach him to do anything, Morgan," I said, my voice quiet and calm. "He's a child. He saw his mother crying, and he said what he saw. He told the truth. A truth your new husband, it seems, was too much of a coward to tell you yourself." Evan flinched as if I had struck him. He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading shame. "Tessa, I am so sorry," he stammered. "I was going to tell her, I swear. I didn't know how." "You were going to tell me what?" Morgan demanded, whirling on him, her rage now turning from me to him. "What is she talking about, Evan? What lie have you been telling me?" And then, in the cramped, cluttered living room of my small apartment, the final ugly confession finally happened. It was not a quiet admission. It was a dam of cowardice and deceit breaking. "It's true, Morgan," he cried, his own voice breaking. "It's all true. I have been coming here. I have been talking to Tessa because I made a mistake, a terrible, life-ruining mistake." He looked from my sister's horrified face to my own cold, unreadable one. "I love her," he whispered, and the words were a final, devastating blow to my sister. "I think I have always loved her. You and I, we were comfortable. We made sense on paper. But Tessa, she's the one I should have been with. I was just too afraid of our families, of what everyone would say. I was a coward, and I have ruined everything." The fight that erupted then was a terrible, ugly thing to witness. It was a storm of a year's worth of lies and a lifetime of my sister's insecurities. They screamed, they cried, they threw accusations at each other like stones. And through it all, I was the quiet, cold center of their hurricane. I listened as he confessed his weakness. I listened as she raged about her humiliation. I listened to the death rattles of a marriage that had never truly been alive in the first place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, their rage and their grief burned itself out, leaving behind a silence thick with the ashes of their lies. They stood on opposite sides of my small living room, two strangers in wedding clothes, their fairy tale in ruins. I stood up from my armchair. "This," I said, my voice a quiet, final judgment on the entire sordid affair, "is a mess of your own making. The two of you." I looked at Evan. "Your cowardice," I looked at my sister, "and your cruelty." I walked to my front door and opened it. "What you do with this truth now is your business. It has nothing to do with me." They just stared at me, two broken people with nowhere left to go. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice now as cold and as hard as steel. "Both of you. And do not come back." I closed the door and stood in the silence of my own apartment, my back pressed against the door, and I listened as the sounds of my sister's hysterical sobs and my ex-fiancé's pathetic pleas faded down the hallway. The storm had passed through my home, leaving behind a strange, quiet, and deeply unsettling peace. The war, I thought, was over. I had lost a sister and the lingering illusion of the family I had so desperately wanted to be a part of. The days that followed were a quiet, self-imposed exile. My phone was a relentless barrage of calls and messages, not just from Morgan and Evan, but now from my parents and my Uncle Franklin. I did not answer. I blocked their numbers, one by one, a series of small, decisive clicks that severed the toxic ties to my old life. I needed silence. I needed to breathe. But the world, I soon learned, does not allow for quiet in the wake of such a spectacular disaster. The story of what had happened at Morgan's perfect wedding reception became the stuff of legend in our small, gossipy social circle. The story, as it was told, was a garbled, dramatic mess, but the central facts were undeniable. The bride's own sister had been having an affair with the groom, and her young son had exposed the entire sordid affair in the middle of the reception. I was, in their telling, the villain, the jealous, vindictive older sister who had used her own child to ruin her sister's happiness. And my family, in their desperation to control the narrative, did nothing to correct it. In fact, they encouraged it.
It was easier for them to paint me as the monster than to confront the ugly truth about their golden child's failed fairy tale. The first real consequence fell upon my uncle, Franklin. His cruel public toast, the one that had started the whole avalanche, was now seen in a new, ugly light. His business partners, his friends at the country club, they had all heard the story. And his attempt to humiliate a struggling single mother was not seen as a witty joke, but as a profound act of public cruelty. He was no longer the charming patriarch. He was a bully. And in a world that, for all its faults, still values the appearance of decency, he had lost face. The social standing he valued so much was, I heard through a distant cousin, deeply and permanently tarnished. My parents faced a different kind of ruin. Their perfect family, the one they had curated for decades, was a public sham. They were the parents of a daughter whose wedding had imploded in scandal and another daughter who was now a social pariah. They were left alone in their big, quiet house with the wreckage of their own making. But the true and most profound consequence was for my sister. A week after the wedding, a single, handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was hers. I almost threw it away, but some small, lingering part of me, the part that still remembered the little girl I had once played with in our backyard, made me open it.
The letter was not what I expected. It was not full of accusations or anger. It was an apology, a raw, broken, and deeply honest one. Tessa, it began, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need to say it. You were right. I was cruel. Not just at the wedding, but for our entire lives. I was jealous of you. You were always so quiet, so self-sufficient, so good, and I was loud and needy, and I hated you for it. I hated that you didn't seem to need anyone's approval, especially Mom and Dad's, and I spent my entire life trying to make you feel as small as I felt inside. Evan and I, we annulled the marriage. It was a lie. He confessed everything. But the real lie, she wrote, and I could see a small, tear-stained blot on the paper, was mine. The one I told myself, that having the perfect husband, the perfect wedding, would make me happy. It didn't. It just made me a monster. I am so sorry for what I did to you and to Cody. He is a brave, wonderful boy, and he has a mother who is 1,000 times stronger than I will ever be. I don't expect to hear from you. I just needed you to know the truth. Morgan. I folded the letter, my own tears now falling onto the page. My victory, my vindication, it had never been about them. It was not in their ruin or their shame. It was in this single, small, and fragile piece of truth. The story ends not with a triumphant celebration, but with a quiet and deeply uncertain beginning. It is a month later. I am sitting in a small, neutral coffee shop, a cup of tea in my hands. The bell above the door jingles, and my sister, Morgan, walks in. Her face is pale, and she is not the glamorous princess I have always known. She is just a woman. A sad and broken, and finally, honest woman. We do not hug, we do not exchange easy pleasantries. We just sit in a silence that is not angry, but full of the heavy, unspoken weight of a lifetime of pain. Thank you for the letter, I say. Thank you for coming, she whispers. The future of our relationship is a vast, uncharted territory. I do not know if we can ever be the sisters we were supposed to be, but as I look at her, really look at her, for the first time without the filter of jealousy or resentment, I see not a rival, but a survivor, just like me, and I realize that the perfect family I had always dreamed of was never real. But this messy, difficult, and finally brutally honest connection with my sister, this might just be the beginning of a real one.
an incredibly powerful and mature story about the painful process of breaking a toxic family cycle and the small, difficult steps toward healing. What a testament to the protagonist's strength. This story has a very complex ending. Do you think Tessa did the right thing by agreeing to meet her sister, or should she have cut her off forever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this powerful family drama, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.